Hello and welcome, listeners, to our English program podcast Kaleidoscope. Listeners, in our today's program, we have the second part of the program, Crawling Out of the Rabbit Hole, Poems on Mental Health, written and narrated by Disha Tasgaonkar.
Hello, my dearest gentle listeners. This is Disha Tasgaonkar, and today I will be talking about more on self-love and self-acceptance. So what I'm about to recite is my poetry on self-love and self-realization. So this poem is titled, "And That's Okay." Some days I might not write. Some days I might not verbalize my feelings. Some days I might not relish my best loved food. Some days I might not be willing to talk to my most treasured people. Some days the air around me might seem unusually heavy, reeking of existential dread. Some days my mind would be too saturated to comprehend the things you said. Some days I do not want to be held or cuddled. Some days I might not fill you with the happenings of my day. Some days I might not mince my words before speaking them out. This doesn't mean I don't love you or value you or deem you fit enough to handle my emotional upheavals. It simply means I am tired, playing different roles to different people, pandering to everyone else's needs before my own. Too worn out to stand on my wobbly legs, too muddled to assimilate all the nitty-gritties of life, too neck-deep in fulfilling others' demands, too caught up in the web of material entanglements, and too scatterbrained to even remember things. So let me for once make myself a priority today. Let me unclog my mind of all the inconsequential nagging thoughts that gnaw at me every minute of the hour. Let me exclaim sharply to myself that yes, I matter, not by those hovering around me, but by me alone. Let me have an abysmal conversation with my otherwise occupied mind to my heart's content about all the good, the bad, and the ugly things that I have been through but never had a chance to soak in or process. Therefore, let today be all about me, because we all have our days, don't we? And some days we are allowed to feel all the above all at once, and I think that's okay. So this was my poetry, and that's okay. So when I wrote this poem, I was embracing the idea of self-compassion and the need to prioritize my own emotional well-being. This poem came from a deep place of exhaustion, feeling overwhelmed by constantly catering to the needs of others and neglecting my own. I wanted to express this idea that it's okay to have days where you sometimes feel disconnected or drained, but that doesn't diminish the love or care you have for those around you. So writing this poem was my own way of giving myself permission to step back, reflect, and acknowledge that self-care is essential, even if it means not being there for everyone all the time. It was about recognizing that sometimes we need to give ourselves the space to breathe, and that, my dear listeners, is perfectly fine. So the next poem that I'll be talking is something which tells that we all need to step away from the fairy tale narrative that we have in our minds, that there will always be someone who will swoop in to save the day for you, but instead You need to become the hero of your own story. So this poem is titled as The White Knight. Before wading through my heart's murmurings, bear in mind, this is not a fairy tale in which a damsel in distress is rescued by a white knight. Each passing day, I witness an emotional tug of war betwixt my mind and my heart, crippling every throbbing nerve of my head space. If only I could verbalize these unabating thoughts out loud. But again, how would I? Because much of my productive time is squandered away being a wallflower, overlooked and dismissed. Understanding, compromising, sacrificing, overhauling, sustaining, adapting, and the list is endless. They say mingle to keep your sanity intact. But how ethical is that sanity which makes you feel mentally depleted, exposing every ounce of your shriveled bare bones for the world to see and deduce? Tell me, what good comes out of one-sided conversations? For me, being a sympathetic listener is no more a virtue because it comes with its own unwieldy baggage. When I looked high and low for nurturance with my entreating eyes, I was greeted by hands raised, shrugged shoulders, uncaring stares, cold receptions, wagging tongues with no censored filters, unsolicited opinions bandied around without any embellished afterthought, and disapprovals floating around like scintillating phosphines in blinding sunlight. So, alone for me isn't being lonely anymore. It is me holding space for myself, exploring the uncharted confines of my heart, then being an absolute train wreck, doing all the heavy lifting unchaperoned and unautonomous, rebuilding, reconditioning, fortifying, stiffening, reviving. So now I choose to be the white knight in my own story, rising, falling, drifting, retreating. So this poem was basically a feeling, a mix of frustration, determination, and a deep sense of empowerment as I process the idea that it's in the end all up to me to rebuild and fortify myself. So writing this was an act of reclaiming my autonomy and recognizing that strength lies in my own resilience. The next poem is titled as Unscathed, and this poem was inspired by Robert Frost. So it says that what matters most is how you wake up each day to the glistening effulgence outside your window that nudges you to see beyond the superficial light and embrace the bleak reality besetting you. What matters most is how you reclaim your peace of mind despite being someone who always gets the short end of the stick, grappling hammer and tongs, a long-standing battle between your dithering mind and your anguished heart. What matters most is how immaculately you stitch up a forced smile permanently affixed on your face, listening with sky patience to all the brickbats flung in your direction. What matters most is how dauntlessly you resurrected from an unfathomable chasm devouring you like Ouroboros, and yet dwell in the possibility for hope to thrive, making every last-ditch effort with an unyielding defiance to survive. What matters most is how you strive each day to untie the double fisherman's knot of circumstances that has convoluted your life journey bringing it to a screeching halt. What matters most is how well equipped you are with your answers to all those why-me questions that you tend to ask yourself in solitude, shrouded in glacial silence. What matters most is how you self-regulate your mind, crammed with intrusive thoughts, when you stir awake from your sleep at 3 a.m. with a jolt of anxiety, hyperventilating. What matters most is how you jot down those unsayable thoughts on paper with your unchecked tears of vexation, coursing down your crimson cheeks, blurring your vision and robbing you of the ability to breathe. What matters most is how you revive those wilted flowers of self-love in your heart's Arcadia to restore their vitality again. Because in the end, what matters most is how well you walk through fire, unscathed, undaunted, unabashed, carrying your mighty resolve like a glow stick in an unilluminated blackness. So this was Unscathed, my poem, which was inspired by Robert Frost's poem, What Matters the Most. So these were my poems where I delved deeper into self-love and how I finally accepted myself. And now I would like to conclude this session with another poem which is really close to my heart, and telling all the world that I was in a transformative space, reflecting on my journey from struggle to empowerment. This particular poem captures the raw emotions of defeat and despair I felt years ago, but it's also a celebration of resilience and rebirth. So this poem is both a farewell to the girl I used to be and an affirmation of my newfound indestructibility, reminding myself that yes, just like others, I can rise above any challenges. This is titled as I Am Titanium. 2 years ago, I pounded the gavel on my upended existence to blatantly proclaim my defeat, to mete out a sentence which was worse than what is given to any homicide convict. Alienated, angst-ridden and cooped up, uncomplaining, I took it all in my stride, picking at my scabs ad nauseum until I exhumed every unnoticeable Achilles heel in all its entirety. The knots of dogged resilience that I gingerly tied over the years came all undone in a flash, and there I was, giddy with grief, debilitating inwards, redirecting myself to the same path of despondency at every given opportunity. Writing came sauntering along to repair my disintegrated framework that had gone to rack and ruin. Poetry, a self-talk that I gave to myself solemnly each night to restrain the niggling voices in my headspace, warranting nothing more but peace and sanity. So now, I am no longer that girl who was left in the lurch. I am no longer that girl who was miscalculated in her spirit. I am no longer that girl who pawned her own happiness for others. I am no longer that girl who downplayed her abilities when criticized. I am no longer that girl who carried a noose of grief round her neck, waiting for the executioner of circumstances to strangle her. I am no longer that girl who would term every stumbling block as bottleneck. I am no longer that girl, a candle in the wind to be doused by some unanticipated air current. I am no longer that girl who would sit before the burial pit of olden memories, lamenting over their unforeseen losses. Yes, I am no longer the same girl that I used to be, for I've kissed the ground beneath her goodbye, letting out a sigh of bliss. So, Like the sun, I'll keep rising from the east at every dawn. At eventide, I'll paint myself midnight blue to become one with the starry sky. At nightfall, I'll dance as moon glades on water, exhibiting my silvery charm in all its grandeur. Ergo, I write this today with a Dishan smile on my face, because I finally made out of the mud in the end, smelling like fresh roses. Yes, the one behind the whale paving her own way, strewn with cherry blossoms. For I am titanium, withstanding, forbearing, unyielding, hard-wearing, and indestructible. So, this was my poetry. I am titanium. That how I survived this massive shipwreck called anxiety. I know anxiety and depression will always be a part of my life, but I have learned to accept it. And this time I won't cave in. This time I am ready to face it with my open eyes, and I'm ready to embrace it with my open heart and my outstretched arms. So this was my set of poetry where I spoke more about self-realization, self-love and acceptance. Thank you so much for giving me a keen ear and listening to my heart renditions. Thank you so much, my dearest, gentle listeners.
So listeners, that was the second and the final part of the program Crawling Out of the Rabbit Hole, Poems on Mental Health, written and narrated by Disha Tasgaonkar. Hope you enjoyed listening to her. We'll be back with another exciting program. Until then, thanks for listening and please stay tuned as our next program follows.